Well, hello and welcome. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I was approached by Jana Allaby of the Auburn University Libraries, who wanted to raise awareness about open access and all of the goodness that it provides, the barriers that you work around when you're using open access. And we're just a few weeks off of Open Access Week, which happened in October, which didn't work with our schedule. So here we are extending the celebration of Open Access Week into November. So I'll turn it over to Jane and she will introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. So as Diane mentioned, I'm Jana Allaby from the libraries, and I'm going to give sort of like a brief introduction to open access in case you haven't heard about that before or you're not familiar with it. And then we were able to get Nick Giordano, the Dean of COSAM, to come and sort of talk about his experiences as a researcher participating in open access and also as an administrator and supporting open access. And then I have my colleague from the library, Casey Van Horn, who's going to talk to us about open educational resources. So we're sort of trying to hit a lot of topics. So open access for researchers and the work that you create as a researcher, but also as a teacher. How can you use some of these open resources for your classes? And so we have a fairly small group here, so if you want to ask questions, please feel free to do that. We are hoping that it'll be a little bit more of a conversation. And so when I talk about open access, I usually try to start with this picture here, right? This is how I think we all are pretty familiar with how traditional scholarly publishing works. You do your research, you write your paper, you submit it to a journal, it gets reviewed, hopefully it gets accepted, then there's this little tiny thing that's called a publication agreement that gets signed, and you're willing to sign probably your firstborn child away to get it published. I know I was willing to do that, and then it gets published and we're all excited, right? The problem with that process is that little step of signing away your rights, signing that publication agreement. Because a lot of publishers actually take more rights from you than they, strictly speaking, need in order to publish your work. The problem is that copyright holders control how much is charged for your work and what you can do with it later. So even though you've created this work, you may not be able to use it in your teaching, depending on the agreement that you signed with your publisher. This is a picture of a paywall. I'm sure we've all run into this when you're off campus, especially you're trying to access an article and then it's like, oh, $35.95, and you can have this article. And most of us are probably not very quick to pull out our wallets, right? So if you think about when you've encountered that, what do?
Interlibrary loan.
You can go to interlibrary loan. Maybe you don't have time for that sometimes, so you might even just skip it and find another work that will work for you. So one of the things that we're interested in is trying to help you as a researcher spread access to your work so that other people can find it and then use it, right? And then cite it. So that's where open access comes in. It sort of removes that pay barrier. Open access technically is two aspects. It's removing the pay barrier for the reader, and it's also lifting a lot of copyright restrictions. So if somebody else wants to take your work and make a derivative of it or translate it into another language, that's another thing that can also be encompassed from open access. And there are two different ways basically that you can go about making your work open access. They have names. So gold is basically you're choosing an open access journal or open access book publisher, and so they've agreed that they're not going to charge readers to read your work. Some of the journals will ask you to pay what's called an article processing charge so that they can do the copy editing and host your article and do all of the review stuff that happens in traditional journals as well. Some of them don't do that. Some of those journals are going to be sponsored by universities or other scholarly societies that'll sort of absorb those costs. The other option, which is the one that I think we're really trying to encourage people to do, is to participate in taking something that you have published with whatever journal that you want to publish with, whatever prestigious place that you want to put your piece, and then keep enough of your rights so that you can put a copy into what's called an institutional repository. So we're calling it Aurora. It's basically just a database of publications from Auburn researchers. And so it can be articles, it can be book chapters, conference papers, poster presentations, even raw data if you want to share that. Some journals won't allow you to have all those supplementary materials, so this is a nice place to have kind of everything. And then Aurora is actually indexed by Google, so people can pick it up and find your work and then access your article and your raw data if you're putting that there as well. And so here's just a screenshot of what Aurora looks like. It is live. You could go there now. You could submit something right now. You could test it out. You could play with it if you want to see how hard it is. I think Diane submitted something earlier today, and how long would you say it took, Diane? Like a few minutes?
12 minutes.
Okay.
Well, because you have to access like your agreement and you have to figure out what volume, all that stuff.
Yeah, and you have to remember all of the citation pieces that it's going to ask for. So it's not a lot of time, but there is some time involved, some thought involved in submitting to Aurora.
The second time it won't take so long.
And so Dean Giordano recently submitted something to Aurora, so we sort of wanted to get his perspective as well.
Okay, well, let me, before I talk about that, I'll just say some general things. I'm a physicist, and so, of course, physicists are always are a proud bunch. And I think, not myself, but other physicists played a big role in getting open access really off the ground. There's this, I guess it's, I don't know, it was called a preprint server for a while. I'm not sure what it's called now. I think it's moved to Cornell, as I remember.
I think it's Archive.
The archive is located at Cornell. It used to be at Los Alamos, I think.
Seems right.
But some physicists started it. It was basically a big repository for everybody's preprints from all over the world. And I guess Los Alamos paid for the space, and there was a person who was really committed to it, and now I think Cornell's taken it over as a community service. I use it some. It's a handy place to look for things. I have some friends who before they end their day in the office, they go to see what's been posted in their field that day. So it's a way to keep really up to date. I mean, that's a little extreme maybe, but it's a field where people are doing a lot of stuff, and he didn't want to ever be caught unawares. The reference has now become ubiquitous, so I've seen this thing mentioned in promotion documents. I see it mentioned as references in published papers. So it's really got it's got the official a seal of approval by the community. And so I think it's really made a difference. It's put pressure on some of the publishers to open up. I think otherwise they might not have as much. You can say more about that as librarians than I could, but my impression is that really forced the publishers to rethink their approach to this. And so it's had a big impact, and I guess other disciplines now have got similar servers, so that's been a good thing. Now my own take on it, my take as an administrator is the wider access our stuff has, the better off we all are. Okay, so if anybody has trouble finding something from, say, a person in physics here at Auburn or in geosciences or whatever, that's a bad thing. The more they can find, more easily they can find your stuff, your work, and learn from it. The more easily they can learn about your work, the better off you're going to be, and the better off we're going to be. So having one more place where it's available is a good thing. And I think we often overlook that because the journals that I publish in are basically any decent university library would have online subscriptions. And so, for example, I've been published a lot lately in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America. It's hard to believe that any self-respecting library would not have that available online. So I tend not to think about it being limited in access, but there are. I have colleagues who are retired or people who are from whatever country, and I have to keep in mind I want those folks to have access to my things, to our things. So we had to keep it in mind. And then of course there are more obscure journals too, where maybe it does cost $10 an article, and then that is a real barrier. Plus the fact that if we post it the way Gina described, it's going to be out there sooner, and people will see it sooner. So those are a good thing. Now. As Gina's helped me through this process, I started posting some things now, and again, I think maybe I just don't think about it as much. I'm not worried about getting tenure anymore than maybe like I used to be. So I don't sweat that as like I maybe should. But it makes you think about, okay, let's get my stuff out there so people can see it. I'm working on an article now that won't come out until January, February. I know it's coming out. I probably should post it. No one has a way of knowing about it right now, and it's not quite. Anyway. I need to be more conscious of it. So I just think it's a good thing. Again, the journal I just mentioned. Before I came over, I took a look at its open access policies. I will admit I did not pay the page charges to post it in their open access way.
But I said, but I can post the PDF that I make, and there are other ways I can post it on our local server, either on my own website or at Aurora. And that's what I'll be doing in the future. So again, I think just access is the key word. The more people have access, the better off we all are. And that's a good point, because I hope that I said it this way. I meant to say it this way initially. But so with Aurora, we're hoping that you will put a version of your article into it. So it may not be that final PDF that's created from the publisher, although some publishers will let you do that. Not all of them will. But oftentimes that version that you've gotten back after it's been peer reviewed is pretty close to the final version. There may be some formatting things, some cleaning up that happens, but it's essentially the same content. So that's what a lot of publishers will allow you to post to Aurora.
Right. So, I mean, in terms of, for me, I know you're going to talk about more teaching kinds of access. For me, teaching-wise, I think I'm legal. I mean, I think I think I understand fair use well enough to know that that my needs are being covered by those kinds of capabilities. And it may not always be the case in what you're going to talk about. For me, it's usually pretty small snippets. I mean, as an example, I'll just go through the fair use thing I just did. I was doing it. This is for a paper that's coming out again very soon. The editor wanted me to put in some sound samples. I do acoustic stuff, and I wanted to pull out some snippets of CDs. We looked up the fair use rules. If it's 20 seconds or less, and I attribute where it came from, I can use it under fair use. So again, I don't have to worry about open access quite the same way for that. But fair use can only get you so far. I think it's different in another discipline, which we're probably going to talk about. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a bit of a difference in just the fair use of regular resources and then open educational resources, which we'll talk about.
And so I thought what we'd do next, because copyright is definitely a factor in terms of open access and submitting your work to Aurora, I thought we could sort of take a look at maybe a couple of publication agreements. So if you don't have those, let me know and I can get them for you. But let's look at the blue one and the orange one.
Yeah.
I see some interesting looks on your faces.
The thought that I wouldn't be able to use something in an oral presentation. I mean, this one says it's okay, but if you couldn't,
Right.
that's what we do with our research. We go to a meeting and we present it.
And also, NIH grantees should check the box at the bottom of this document. That's weird.
Yeah.
And so the two agreements that I was sort of calling your attention to, one is from Johns Hopkins University Press, and so that's the blue one. And if you read that, it tells you that, rights of the author, you have the following rights. So you can use the article in your own teaching, your own lectures. I mean, how many of us would have thought that we couldn't do that?
Right.
And I think a lot of the current agreements are a response to faculty researchers saying, you can't do this. You can't take all of these rights. Like, I put in this effort, this sort of intellectual effort for this stuff. You can't just take all of it. And so especially society presses and university presses are usually really good about sort of respecting that and I think trying to make that balance between their business of selling research, but also respecting the rights of faculty and what they have put together. But this one does say that you can publish your article in any book that you might write. You can include it in your personal or departmental institutional database, so like Aurora, or your institutional database, provided the database doesn't compete with Johns Hopkins. So Dr. Giordano was mentioning Archive, which is a disciplinary repository for physics and I think math and so it's the same idea of Aurora, only it's for a discipline, not just one university. So we are limiting ours to just Auburn folks.
Well,
Yeah.
what
Diane.
about the Google indexing thing?
What? Well, yes. What about the Google indexing thing?
So without that, yes, we are limiting it to the institution, but with that, are we?
Oh, yeah, because it says like you can't. So it's a repository that doesn't accept contributions from outside the institution. So we're only accepting contributions to Aurora from outside. It's not limiting it to who can get to it for this particular one.
Right.
But then if you look at the one from Wiley, which is a commercial publisher, the orange paper. So in this one, you can see like what it permits you to do with your published work, right? So there's the submitted version that you are turning into the journal initially. There's the accepted version that you get back after it's been reviewed. And then the final version, which again, it says like, okay, you can make some copies for colleagues. And then you can use it in your teaching and your oral presentations. But this one is much more sort of restrictive. Under the accepted version, it says that in order to use the accepted version in a repository, you have to have a special agreement with Wiley. And so that again sort of adds like another barrier that you as the author have to go through in order to maintain those rights and do with your work what you want to do with it.
Can I ask a question? So can you finesse that? I mean, most time an author knows that you're about to be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
So if the version you send in to be accepted, but it hasn't yet, if you post that, don't you avoid their angst?
I should say now I'm not a lawyer, but that seems like that would probably fall in that gray area that's not totally defined. The other thing that you can do is there are things called author addendums that you can add to your copyright agreement that says, okay, I'm going to sign your agreement, but I want to maintain my rights to do X with this work. So I want to be able to put this in the institutional repository, and that's something that has also a lot of copyright agreements are trying to take that into account too. So, and the other thing that you can do is always try to communicate with the journal editor once it has been accepted, once you see, because I think a lot of us don't look at the copyright transfer agreement until, probably until after we've already signed it and have gotten that promotion and tenure dossier in. So something else that you can do is to talk with the editor of the journal to tell them, okay, I'm interested in holding on to these particular rights. So I want to be able to put a copy of this work in our repository. And then there are some publishers, I know Taylor & Francis, I think, has, if you tell them that, then they'll just say, oh, well, let me send you the form for that. So it's just, they already have it set up. It's not like they're having to do anything else. Or it's not like you're having to do anything else other than asking. So I think that's, yeah.
In a recent tenure and promotion discussion, the issue of how a particular unit was going to handle indexing and indexing services for scientific work in terms of the Science Citation Index or something of that nature, and or other indexes, and whether when we're looking at a candidate for tenure and promotions dossier, should we have those kinds of indexing associated with it, so on. But the issue comes down to, in open access journals, if we're putting that in an institutional repository, does that really work in terms of like the number of views of your publication that have taken place and the number of times your work has been cited and so on, if they're getting access to it from that perspective rather than from an actual journal? How does Google Docs and other places keep track of that, or do they keep track of it, and is there an impact of that on what's something probably pretty near and dear to most of the people at the faculty of an institution.
So I will say that some of the studies on open access and the effect of making your work open access and on your citations or other sort of impact factor type things, that literature does suggest that if more people have access to it, if it's not behind those paywalls, it's more likely to be cited. It may be cited more often. So that doesn't necessarily tell you the quality of who's citing you, but it does tell you that more people are finding your work useful.
I have a question related to that. So, I have colleagues who don't want to make their work accessible because they don't want people to plagiarize them. So, I'd love to hear some creative ways to respond to that because it seems like a foreign argument to me. So I can't figure out how to help people see the beauty of having more people understand or read their ideas. But usually all I say is that people are going to do whatever they're going to do, whether or not it's behind the paywall.
Yes. So one thing that, if you have sort of the timestamp of when you have put your work online in Aurora once it has gone live, you could actually use that to make your case for this is when this went live and then this person copied it at this time or whatever. But if people are going to copy your work, they're going to copy your work. You can't really stop people from doing that. You can only sort of take action after the fact. That's typically how I think the copyright law sort of works. Because there's nothing that makes it so that you can't. I mean, unless you want to put digital rights management on your work, which is, I don't know how to do that.
So is Aurora for the already published work that repository for that, or unpublished, unreviewed? It's just you wrote something and you put it up.
So what we have said in the library is that it's for scholarly work that you want to make available on a permanent basis to the world.
How do you define scholarly work?
That's left up to each department. So if in your department you want to say that we're only going to accept things that have been published, then that's typically what most institutional repositories have, along with the other thing is that gray literature, so poster sessions at conferences that tend to just disappear into the air, right? Those are great things to submit to Aurora. And then conference papers that maybe also would have just disappeared, or something else, conference presentations that maybe that you want people to have access to, but that it's not part of that permanent record.
The question was for the tenure and promotion dossiers, the importance is your work is peer reviewed. And if it is in an indexed journal, that tells you that it is peer reviewed. Mm-hmm. And if you cannot show that on your dossier, and it has no value, right? In terms of evaluation of your dossier.
Well,
so that's, I think this is important for faculty, but I have another question later on.
I mean, I would say that I think that we could make space for it to be valuable, that research that you're producing is accessible by a much broader audience. Because I think that helps even us, as an institution, to get the Auburn name out even more. And I think it also fulfills that role of us as a land-grant institution and outreach. And so making not just this important discovery, but also helping others to access that discovery and improve their lives, the quality of their lives, right? But basically, we've not set up Aurora so that it has to be one way or the other. Because one thing that it seems that has happened is if you tell faculty that they need to publish in open access journals and that's what they have to do, then there's a lot of pushback because you're obviously concerned about your own name, publishing in prestigious journals. That's important. We want you to get tenure. We want you to keep producing research. And this Aurora seems like a way to not interfere with that. So you can still publish with your prestigious journal as long as you're keeping enough rights to put a copy of the article in Aurora. That's what we're hoping will happen. So.
A couple of the things that we've noticed that's coming, though, is part of this idea of having peer-reviewed journals that are outside of regular publications, and they're trying to push that more and more and more so that they can get away from the expensive people that are making you pay to do all this. Do you see that being a part of this, or being able to grow with other libraries, or doing something along those lines maybe? Do you guys see that at all in what you're doing?
I mean, in the library profession as a whole, yes. There are definitely libraries who are supporting the creation of open access journals that are coming out of different societies or different departments. And so they're sort of absorbing those costs of publishing and doing the infrastructure. But it sort of is two different tracks that you can take. And right now at Auburn, we're focusing more on this green open access as opposed to pushing the gold open access of those, creating those journals.
The other piece that we've noticed is the open educational resource textbooks that people are building. Do you guys see taking in part of that as that grows?
Yes, and I will let Casey take over now. And we do have resources for you to use to look and check up publisher policies. So that was the other thing. But excellent segue.
Yes, nice segue. Thank you very much. So, switching gears just a little bit, and I'm just going to share with you a little bit about open educational resources. I am a librarian here at Auburn, and I also teach English part-time for Columbus State University over in Columbus. And I'm going to share a little bit with you about my experience switching from a traditional text classroom to a classroom that uses open educational textbook. And I decided to do this when I found out my text was going to be discontinued. I was about to have to make a switch anyway about this time last year. And at the beginning of every semester, since I started teaching for CSU 7 years ago, I get emails from students, and they're always telling me reasons why they cannot purchase the textbook, or that, it's usually financial reasons. Maybe their financial aid is on hold, maybe they didn't get as much financial aid as they thought they would get, or they didn't get any, or they can't get it now, they need to get it later. And the textbook section of my syllabus was getting longer and longer. I was having to put things in it like, it's your responsibility to find access to the text. I cannot copy, scan, email the textbooks and send them to you, so you need to be able to find the readings for the class. And that's just not how I wanted to teach my students. It wasn't the message I wanted to send. It wasn't the kind of teacher I wanted to be. So when I had the opportunity to redo my class a little bit, I had heard some things from my colleagues who were experimenting with open educational resources, and I was ready to learn as much as I could about it and make this change. And I'll tell you about it a little bit. So to start, just a little bit of a brief definition of open educational resources. I don't know how familiar everyone here is with open educational resources, so just a basic introduction is open educational resources are anything that are created, any type of teaching materials that are created purposely to be freely accessible, to be adaptable, and things that you can share and use. So this is whole courses that people create that they make open. It's also things like textbooks, assignments, individual assignments, lesson plans, all types of resources, everything that you may or may not need to teach a course. And the thing that makes open educational resources different than just regular resources that you would abide by the fair use guidelines that you mentioned is that these follow this 5R framework. So instead of something like, say, the Purdue OWL, a lot of people have used that before and seen it before, that's something that you are certainly welcome to share. You can distribute that with your students as long as you get their permission. They ask that you let them know when you use it. But you can't do these things with it. So that's an example of a traditional resource that you can use and share. But things that are considered strict OERs or open educational resources, they follow this 5R framework. And you are allowed to take these things and make copies of them. You can use them however you need to use them, change them to be most relevant to you and to your students for your course. You can adapt them in any way, even combining them with other documents, other things that you need to add to your class, and then you can share it with other people. An easy way to locate these kinds of resources is to be on the lookout for these types of Creative Commons licenses. The things that give you the most freedom are those that allow you to use things. Maybe you just have to give credit to the original creator, or maybe they ask that you give credit to them and also share it back to the community with a share-alike license. And sometimes you'll see things that ask that these types of open documents not be used for commercial purposes, that they're not used to make money. But most of the time, the freedom that they're free as long as you abide by those types of rules. If you're not allowed to adapt something or make derivatives of it, it's not particularly an open educational resource in the sense of the types of resources that I'm talking about. Yes?
Can you explain a little bit about Copyleft and like where does it lie on this like graph, something like this?
Well, just traditional copyright?
No, well, I think Copyleft is something that you can, other people can like publish, they can even change, but they cannot use it for commercial use.
Right. That it would be similar to the Creative Commons licensing that they can make a derivative or they can share it and use it for their purposes, but like you said, just no commercial. They can't get paid to reuse your material. And so when I implemented this OER in my classroom, I definitely noticed a little bit of a difference.
Can you go back to the symbols, pretty please?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So I implemented these OERs into my classroom for the first time this semester, and I've already seen a difference in my student engagement. And the reason for that is, well, their costs have gone down, which is great. It's wonderful, and of course I want everyone to be able to participate in the class and participate in the activities. But their engagement has gone up, and I feel like the reason for that is because the open educational resource, the open textbook that I've used, have made things more easily accessible, and I've given the students what they really, really want, which is instant access. It's so much easier for me to communicate with them because I can link directly to the text that we're using. I don't have to tell them to go find this page number, do things that they, with a traditional text, would be more steps. So they have this kind of instant access. What's really great about these open educational resources that I can adapt is that if I want to have them analyze or review a video that is related to the content in the text I've asked them to read, I can just embed that video right there in the text, right after they've read that chapter. They don't have to leave the text, go to the assignments section of the learning management system and click down and find the date. Everything is easily available. It's right there. And they seem to really appreciate that. And I feel like there's a connectedness with my course material that wasn't necessarily there before. I've definitely seen a difference in the effectiveness of that. And I feel like you notice sometimes with students that they don't often see how assignments are connected to each other. They're just trying to make it through each one, get the grade, move along to the next. So I was really excited to see that this was helpful. And I didn't know to expect that type of thing to happen. I was just mainly interested in lowering their costs and giving them these texts that they could all access. So to help you find some open educational resources of your own, I've just listed here some of the things that I found very useful. These are some repositories for open materials, and some of them include whole courses. OpenStax College is just textbooks, but it's interdisciplinary textbooks. These are all interdisciplinary, and they have different levels of information in them. Again, some full courses, some are just mainly textbooks with a little bit of supplemental material, such as assignments that have been shared, lectures and slides that have been shared, lecture materials and things like that, quizzes and tests. All the various information that people have put together have decided that they would share and allow their colleagues to adapt. And on that note, this is not really something that's new. It's something that teachers have been doing all along, but it's just on a much larger scale. I know that the way that I survived my graduate school experience when I was a GTA learning to teach was that my office mates and I shared all our assignments together. We would share our syllabi, we would share our writing assignments, and we could adapt them and use them as we needed to in our own classes. So it's not a new idea, it's just a larger scale, and things aren't locked down to individual institutions. And again, this is just a small list. These are the ones that I found the easiest to start with when I started looking into OER. There are lots more. There's open courseware from MIT with whole giant courses and materials that go along with those. Carnegie Mellon has a site, Open Learning Initiatives, that have more larger courses inside it. But I think these are some great starting points if anyone's interested in getting a start with open educational resources.
Can I ask a question
Of
about
course.
your experience? In terms of pulling it together, sometimes it might be easier to start from like designing your own course, like to pull resources and then to revise and adapt.
Yes.
Can you speak to that from your experience?
From my experience, absolutely, and that is a perfect segue into this slide. So I think probably the first step is to decide if you want to implement open educational resources, how do you want to start? Do you want to start with a small scale, like maybe starting to find some assignments or just a couple of lectures or some quizzes that you can pull in to use into a course that you already have been teaching? Or you could start by trying to adapt a whole entire course that someone else made. Or do you want to just pull in smaller elements? And what I did was I started to look through the possibilities for open educational resources for English composition. I started with those repositories that I listed on the previous slide and just looked through the texts and saw what was available. And I had in my mind already from teaching what types of assignments I wanted to teach. I knew we have certain course objectives, of course. We want our students to learn how to be able to present an argument, how to be able to do college level research. So I knew I wanted to find materials that would help me teach them how to do that. And as I went through the repositories, I picked out some texts that seemed great to be helpful to teach them to do that. And I started with that. I started just by picking out texts, and I built my own assignments around those texts. So for me, that was an easy way to start, starting with the open text that I can adapt. I could take the resource, the text that was available, and I could enter things into it that made reference to my specific assignments so that my students could see where they were going with it. But the text had already been written, and they're very great. They're good texts that I found. So I've had a lot of success starting that way, starting on a smaller scale with the open educational textbook. Yes.
We had a discussion here about open educational texts for English at some point. Mm-hmm. And one of the issues that came up, feedback that we got from the faculty, is that there were particular versions, especially doing 16th century literature, that's literature or something, and that there were particular versions that faculty liked. And the OER version was a different version, edited differently or somehow. And so that became a barrier because even though they were available and were importable into the course, that people were stuck on this edition of whatever class of work.
Right.
Have you run into that with other colleagues in teaching English?
Well, yes. And I think that's probably always, even with traditional texts, I think that's a problem because texts go out of date and then it's hard to assign them and it's hard for the bookstore to keep them in stock, and eventually you have to change. And I really feel like the answer to that is that the change is a good thing. Having to take a second look at my course and change lots of things, make sure that I'm still teaching in a relevant way to these students for today has been very helpful for me.
One other way to approach that is that often colleagues in English departments appreciate like the footnotes or the introductions, and one argument is that it's uncommon for students to read footnotes, especially at the bottom of the page. And so you can provide that special cultural introduction with the version that's near and dear to your heart, and supplement the OER version for your students.
So you teach from your edition, but they just buy?
No, like you will take out the parts from the introduction that the OER edition doesn't have. So a lot of texts will have cultural introductions at the beginning. So So take what you need from that and share that with the students, either in lecture or some other format, and then use the OER version.
That's true, and that's a good point. I'm glad you said that, because I have noticed too that I use all sorts of combinations of materials as well. It's not that every single thing that I have them read is an open educational resource, because I'm still under fair use guidelines, and I can still take 10% of of things, and so I can use other things and incorporate them. So that's a good point.
Have you got any kickback from any of the folks that do have fiduciary interest in it?
I have not, and I will state that Columbus State actually encourages a movement toward this type of resource. There's an initiative, it's called Affordable Learning Georgia, and they are really coming up with lots of ways. They offer grants, they really encourage colleges in Georgia to try to use these types of resources. So I haven't gotten any kickback. I will say, I actually opened a conversation in my class, because we are using these open educational resources, open a conversation about information and information access, and it's interesting, some of the students' response, they really do want to avoid having to pay for textbooks, but they also are not always very trustworthy in regards to resources that are free. So it's really, really interesting to see the response to, well, if it's worth anything, you would have to pay for it, but they don't want to pay for it. So
Yeah. Also, repositories of any sort of test banks, that's kind of a big issue.
For the reuse of tests right. Well, I haven't seen any, and in English it's a little bit different, because I'm not giving traditional tests. I'm having them, write papers and do creative things. So I can see. I haven't used a multiple choice test or anything like that. But I imagine you'd have to mix it up quite a bit.
I think we're going to have to. There was an open access with an entire class of rides.
Right.
We never had so many days.
I was going to say, for those of you in science, there's a science repository through Carleton College. And it's CERC, Science Education, or SERC. But if you look up CERC in Carleton College, there's a science repository of full courses and exercises, lab activities, by stuff. It started as geosciences, but it's expanded to other sciences.
And one other thing I included on this slide, there's actually a link here to this guide that UMass Amherst has created. That's a really nice place to go. It's a getting started with OER guide, and that's what the picture is of. So just another resource if you're interested into looking into that. Really helped me get started. And librarians are really good at finding things too. So, if you need help finding some OERs for your course, feel free to ask.
It might be neat if faculty or graduate students are trying to get introduced to OER in their courses to just use one or two texts. That would be even more neat if they had some kind of measure of how the students, like you had some anecdotal data about how your students responded to OERs, but having other kinds of data about how often did they read, or how well did they perform in projects that asked them to apply the content from that readings. Right. That would be super cool. And then they could write it up in a scholarly article that was peer reviewed and put it in the Florida.
And I will say that the literature that's out right now on OER, the studies that have been done, the findings are showing, for the most part, that when compared with traditional textbook classrooms that have implemented OER, the students are performing as well or better, is the majority of the response. So.
How do you grade the quality of the materials? Because the quality is very variable. Like the MIT SW was probably well curated. So how do you do that from a personal perspective?
I think that's a great question, and for me, I just like I would evaluate any source that I would use for research I was doing, I checked out who wrote it. And a lot of the sites, especially the ones that are included on the pages for those OER repositories, you see who's writing it, where is it coming from, what institution has published it, who's already using it in their classes. And you can get, it's absolutely free to download the text and see what's in it. And for me, a big part of it was just how relevant it was to the students and how well it would speak to them about writing. So the text that I ended up using from a place called Writing Spaces, it's a lot of English professionals. Those essays that are included there are peer reviewed. They're peer reviewed by other English professors. So if you look for peer reviewed sources, you can find those that are also open educationally licensed.
And I think some of the ones too, like from the OpenStax textbooks, like I had someone who was recently talking to us about it, because I think it was from like a nonprofit from Baylor that created it. And so they were having, I think they were trying to get faculty to review the open textbooks that they had created. So some of those OERs will have those reviews too. So there is a wide range of quality though, as with anything.
Right, and you're right. I mean, I'd absolutely be careful in my selection.
And my extreme example for Julia's comment, which is a good comment, right? Is would Galileo have ever gotten anything published peer reviewed? Right? So
He wouldn't have a tenure.
exactly, would have gotten tenure.
He was the professor.
Just imagine his work, right? He gets thrown into the house arrest for 10 years for his work as a physician. So, so peer review project, the thing about open OER projects is that sometimes they get way more eyeballs on them at review than a peer-reviewed article, right? I mean, we all know the peer review process is fraught with all kinds of issues. I agree that PNT, for those purposes, counting-wise, it's easy just to see if is it an officially peer-reviewed kind of journal, but I know some of the people who work in the OpenStax biology textbook. It's a huge team of people spending these.
Yes.
So definitely a huge amount of effort goes into samples.
And I think that goes back too to the idea of sort of open access and where does that fit with the PNT deliberations? Because we use a lot of different proxies for quality, right? So is it in a highly ranked journal? Is it cited a good number of times in reputable places? But those aren't the only ways that we can measure quality. So I don't know, do you have other questions that you like to ask or concerns that you can voice that I will make note of? I have the PNT counting down.
I have a quick question about, actually this is about these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Since, I just sent something off with co-authors, one in a government institution, one in another academic institution. And when we get the agreement back, I'm thinking good thoughts, we're gonna get published. Do I come to you guys and I'm like, I want, or do I have to just navigate that process myself?
So I'm going to say again, I'm not a lawyer, but I will help you navigate what I can.
There is another option of someone who could possibly help you. There's a lawyer at the research department who does help you with their copyright stuff. It's not technically her area, but she is known to volunteer to help people look at their.
Did they recently change their name? Is that the Office of Technology Transfer?
Yeah.
That changed their name to something else?
Something that I can't recall off
Does
the top of
anyone
my
remember?
head. Which is why I'm all like, that group out there.
Right, okay.
But
I got
she
an
has been
email from
known
something
to.
that seemed to be what would formerly have been the Office of Technology Transfer, but it said it came from the central office or something.
Oh, good.
I really thought the way it was worded, I thought it was a spam for a long time. No, actually, this is actually something from Auburn that's real.
Can I ask the dean a question? Has any group in COSAM come to you and asked for support to maybe put together an open educational resource for something like a Concepts of Science course, right, which is non-science majors? Would you entertain such a?
What resources would be needed?
Probably some editorial support type of people, right? And then release time for a bunch of faculty or summer support for a bunch of faculty to write the chapters. So you get a group of, get concept of science typically does, right? Some physical science, some astronomy, some biological science, some chemical stuff. So you get 4 faculty geosciences, so you get some 4 or 5 faculty members, and give them a month's summer salary, 2 months summer salary, so generous. So I'm really invested, and then an editor type person.
Should I support him? I mean, let me turn it around.
Yeah.
I'll put Stephanie on the spot. Isn't part of her scholarly responsibility to produce scholarly works? Do I have to pay her extra to do that?
Well, the question is, is this scholarly work or is this instructional support work, right? So that's the fine line.
Well, I think either. Well, if it's instructional support that for her class, then I'm not going to. I mean, she's employed, right?
Right.
I'm not trying to be a bad person, but just scholarly work. We expect her to do research as part of her scholarly expectations.
So then, in terms of Julia's comment, you count that in her P&T?
Sure. If people develop new parts for their course, develop either new courses or new sections of a course. But that's what I expect faculty to do. That's what I think we should all expect ourselves to do. I don't like the idea of having to pay extra for some of this. The editorial support, I have to think a little harder about, but on the whole, I'm not sure I like that.
I think if the incentive structure is clear in terms of this would count like this is publishing part of the book, right? So essentially they are now publishing a book. So if it counts in the publishing a book kind of category, then I think people would be willing to put the time in.
It would also depend on the mandate, right? So if it was coming down from the college that we want to focus on doing something very specific towards that course, then yeah, it might come from your office. But if it's us as the faculty who are teaching it going, we want to develop things for our course, that's just part of our job.
It could change the thinking. Yeah, I agree.
So I think concepts of science is one of those courses where you could have a huge economic impact by going back to it's not quite Columbia State, but still it's a lot of money goes in textbook, which people basically either rent or throw away or do something with it. And maybe if it's a free resource, they'll keep it at least on, as an iBook or some electronic version. So someday later they might say, hey, what's a science thing that came up in the news? Is there anything you might go back and look at my textbook to see if there's anything about that. So, okay, thanks.
In reference to his question, though, I really wonder whether, yes, it is an academic responsibility, but when you have people on a 9-month appointment, it's our responsibility to find whatever we're going to employ ourselves on in those 3 months during the summer. And if it were an internally useful project, why would it be inappropriate for additional funds for someone on a 9-month salary to get a salary supplement for doing things that will improve their teaching as part of their document, rather than, going off and selling encyclopedias to make ends meet during the summer? I mean, just as a completely extreme example.
Well, I guess it's. So I'll pick on Stephanie again. She. Sorry. I know you can take it. I don't know what course you were teaching or you're going to teach next spring, but you teach a course and you put the time into it and get it set up for your lecture notes. But I don't think we expect that you'll be teaching the same course with the same lecture notes 10 or 20 years from now. You'll be making changes and constantly updating it. And that's just part of what we do as teacher scholars. Does she expect to get extra remuneration for updating a course like that? You can sort of see where I'm headed with this. I'm not comfortable with that. Now there are going to be lines. I'm not sure if Raj said it or Stephanie said it, but if I say for the college it's important that we develop flipped classroom materials for general chemistry. And I know that's a huge amount of effort, and it's above and beyond. Don't ask me where the line is above and beyond. That's case by case. But I can sort of see that there will be above and beyond cases, but there are other cases that are not anywhere close to that, and that's where Yeah, that's my thinking right there. So I had to see the specifics.
And a response to that is on a recurring year in, year out basis, I kind of agree with what you're saying. But on the other hand, when there is a need to make a major revision in a particular course that's coming up that you're going to teach, the idea that you would get summer salary to do that major revision that you would like to do or that would dramatically improve the teaching in that course, and that there were special funds to let you to, once during your career or periodically even make that revision without it being a recurring every year thing that you could do that would make a major contribution to improving the course, perhaps maybe that many people teach, not just you alone. Or I can spend my time during the summer getting a research grant that will pay my summer salary. I'm wondering whether the university's benefit isn't to give me some money to let me improve my teaching and or improve a particular course on a one-time basis, like a research grant would be on a one-time basis.
If I
So
can
that
jump
would
in
be like
there.
the Breeden grant.
Yeah, if I can jump in there. So part of what we're doing now to help people get ready to teach in ESOL classrooms are these large-scale course redesign activities in the summer. But we design them with a deliberate, we take a page from scholarly approaches, right? So we design them scientifically using research, and people in the cohorts provide feedback to one another, much like you get if you write up an article and get some peer feedback and then revise it again. That's the whole, so you see what I mean? I think it would depend on the support, the institutional support would depend on how rigorous that redesign opportunity was and how, because when you engage with your colleagues over that kind of discussion, it's not that you're just redesigning your course, you're helping other colleagues redesign their course, which has benefits for the institution way down the road.
And there was
Yeah, and yeah, there was a professional development grant assigned to that. So, yeah.
Case by case.
I think another aspect of this discussion is thinking more globally. If we're going to be using these OERs, don't we also have a responsibility to add to that? I mean, if we're going to just be takers, use all these great things MIT put out and then not contribute, what does that mean about Auburn? Are we stingy?
I think it's a good point, and I think also people underestimate how much work and how difficult it is to produce a quality piece of material like this. I remember a year or more ago when Apple was trying to sell us on their approach. I'm not sure if you were in the room.
Before I came.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And they were saying, oh, well, put the software at your disposal, and faculty just whip out these textbooks like, I mean, it's not the way it works. It really is.
One that was produced, I think one anywhere.
I mean, I don't know how many were produced, but it doesn't work that way. Quality things are not easy to produce and take a lot of effort. I mean, I've produced major textbooks. Do you know how much it costs a publisher to bring a first edition textbook in intro physics to market? You want to guess? $1 million.
$1 million.
$1 million. It doesn't go to the author, okay? But it's getting people to review all the chapters. It's getting ideas. It's getting critiques. It's getting permissions for all the artwork that's going to be, and getting artwork. I mean, it's a huge $1 million. And the thing is, and again, I was doing this project. We were doing a class test early on, and so we took a couple of early chapters to do a class test one summer. So summer's easier, smaller class, and everything. And we just did Xeroxing of the pages. They were hand drawing and so on. And so we showed this at the end. We had a focus group with the students of how they liked it, and they looked at it. This isn't a real book. It's not in color and things like that. I mean, they expect this $1 million project, or it's not a real book. So So it's not. All I'm saying is the people who say I'm not expecting Bob to go home tonight and next week come back with a tremendous finished book. It doesn't work that way. He's right. It takes a lot of effort. A lot of effort. a lot of time.
So, a question to our other speaker. So, what was your recognition from your institution for using open educational resources?
Well, I'm feeling a nice connection with my students, and my course is running better. I wasn't.
That's okay.
Right.
Invited her to
It
come
was
back
time
and
to update my course, and I did it. So, yeah.
Which is
Right.
Well, just as a counterpoint to that, I would point out that I've been involved in redesigning a genomic biology course. And one of the resources that's open access that I found that's been just tremendous is published by, or is presented by Nature on a website called Scitable, S-C-I-T-A-B-L-E. And this resource has like articles from Nature, which is probably the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, and review articles and things that people have taken and converted into teaching materials. And they're all right in my course area. But what I find is that when I take that material and I use it in my class, flipped classroom over in the science 118 science, what's it called? Easel classroom.
Yeah.
When I use those materials, what I find is I get these blank looks from my students who say, we don't understand any of this. You're giving us assignments to use that we just don't understand. And so I've spent time trying to write an ebook that kind of fits in between what's in science or what's in Nature in this site and what they have as background when they walk into the room. And, you know, Nick, I've been 2 years at this trying to do it while I'm running the class at the same time. And what I'm finding is that, gee, it's terrible on your teaching evaluations. I sure wouldn't take anybody short of a full professor and suggest that they should consider doing this, because the students just hate you for trying to upgrade the quality of their learning like this.
I think that's
you know,
what Casey was saying
let me
earlier,
give you some
Rob.
other feedback. I used to get maybe 1 out of 100 students when they got to, this is largely for pre-pharmacy students, when they got to pharmacy school, I'd get this response back from a handful of students across the years that said, gee, Dr. Losi, we hated your course when we were taking it, but we really love you now because you guys are really prepared for what we're going to do. And I probably got more responses since I've been trying this newer approach and have revised what I was doing. I probably got more responses last year alone in that regard than I had in the previous 8 or 9 years I had done the course. So the good students really wind up rising to the occasion and appreciating it, but there's this whole group of people that are getting sort of left in the dust that aren't getting from the course what they believe that they need and are very vocal in protesting the fact that it just doesn't work very well. Perhaps it's that I'm an old codger who just will not go away from trying to teach content in order to spend more time to get them creative thinking, but I'm trying to weave that in as much as I can. And it works some of the time for the best of the students. It isn't engaging the people who just can't even read a textbook and come up with the definitions of words they need to add. And it has to do with the preparation, I think, of the material coming in. So I think in some courses you may have an experience that's valid for those kinds of people, and I think in particularly science courses where, you know, things are staged and there's prerequisites for courses and prerequisites that follow, and your knowledge level incrementally increments up as each course you take. I'm not sure how well these things work.
Some of us pre-tenure are doing that.
I'm sorry?
Some of us pre-tenure are doing those kind of things, so we may be crazy.
Oh,
But
I try to, but, you know.
But
We'll see how it goes.
I think that's where OERs can be helpful, though, in terms of using them not even as a replacement for your main text that you're focusing on in class, but as a supplementary material. So, for instance, if they're in the second level of a class, maybe you still have that first level or precursor sort of textbook as an OER part of class, and help refer them to that in some ways. But then they're not having to pay for 2 textbooks for the class.
Right.
So do you have any open access educational resources tied to the library?
I don't think that we have any that are sort of tied to the library, no. Casey and I were talking, and we were going to create a guide that would help people find some of these OERs.
Because
That would be
finding
helpful.
these things are just, looking for a needle in a haystack, and if there's an outlet at the library level to guide the faculty, to encourage them to use it, might be something useful.
We'll be happy to peer review, so you'll get credit for that scholarship.
We are glad to help with locating sources.
I think most of the science disciplines have like clearinghouses, like websites to collect that. That shouldn't be hard. I think that's already done.
Yeah. And some of those repositories, I think they're getting better and better too. The way that you can search, the way that you can browse and kind of drill down to find the exact things that you need.
Well, thank you for a surprising and lively